If you've noticed that jars are harder to open, that stairs feel steeper than they used to, or that getting up from a low chair takes a small negotiation with your own body, you are not imagining it. And you are not alone. Something real is happening inside your muscles, and today we're going to walk through exactly what it is, why it happens, and what the research actually says you can do about it. Before we go any further, a quick and honest note. This content is for educational purposes only, and is not medical advice. Please consult your doctor before making changes to your diet or routine, especially if you take medication or have a health condition. Our goal here is simply to help you understand your own body a little better, using real, documented research, not guesses and not fear. There is a name for what you might be feeling. It's called sarcopenia. The word comes from Greek, sarko, meaning flesh, and penia, meaning scarcity or loss. So literally, it means a scarcity of flesh, of muscle. Doctors and researchers use this term to describe the gradual progressive loss of muscle mass, strength and function that happens as we age. Here is the part that surprises most people. This process doesn't start at 60, it doesn't even start at 50. According to research summarized by WebMD, muscle actually reaches its peak size and strength around age 30. After that, the decline begins quietly enough that most people don't notice for years. On average, people lose somewhere between 3 and 5% of their muscle mass per decade after turning 30. For a long time, this loss is small enough to go unnoticed. Your body compensates. You adjust without realizing it. But then something changes around your 60s. The decline doesn't just continue, it accelerates. Let's make that concrete, because a percentage without context doesn't mean much. Researchers at Tufts University estimate that people between the ages of 60 and 70 have, on average, already lost about 12% of their muscle mass. By the time someone reaches 80, that number rises to around 30%. Some studies looking at the full span from 20 to 80 years old suggest total muscle mass can decline by as much as 50% over a lifetime. That's not a small detail hiding in a research paper. That's nearly a third of your muscle, quietly gone by the time most people are enjoying their 80s. And here's the part that deserves your full attention. This isn't rare. Population studies place the prevalence of sarcopenia somewhere between 5 and 13% in people in their 60s. And that number jumps dramatically to somewhere between 11 and 50% in people over 80, depending on how researchers define and measure it. So, if you're feeling weaker, if daily tasks take more effort than they used to, the numbers say you have real company. This is not a personal failure. It's a documented, studied, measurable biological process. And understanding it is the first step to actually doing something about it. Now I want to invite you to be part of this journey with us. If this kind of information feels useful to you, take a second and subscribe to the channel. We publish content like this regularly, built on real research, made specifically for people who want to stay strong, independent, and informed as they age. And before you move on, drop a comment below telling me one thing from this video so far that surprised you. It helps us know what matters most to you, and it helps other people find this video too. So what is actually causing this loss? It's not one single thing. It's a combination of factors working together, and understanding each one helps explain why the solutions we'll talk about later actually work. The first factor is hormonal. As we age, levels of several key hormones decline naturally. Testosterone drops. Growth hormone drops. So does a hormone called insulin-like growth factor, or IGF-1. These hormones are essential for something called muscle protein synthesis, which is simply the process your body uses to build and repair muscle tissue. When these hormones decline, That repair process slows down, and the muscle you lose through everyday wear and tear gets replaced more slowly and less completely than it used to be. The second factor is neurological. Your muscles don't move on their own. They respond to signals sent from motor neurons, the nerve cells that connect your brain to your muscle fibers. As we age, we naturally lose some of these motor neurons. When a motor neuron is lost, the muscle fibers it used to control lose their connection too. And without that signal, those fibers can shrink or become inactive. This is one of the more sobering facts about aging muscle. Some of the loss isn't about the muscle itself, it's about the wiring that controls it. The third factor is chronic low-grade inflammation. As people age, many experience a persistent background level of inflammation in the body, sometimes linked to chronic disease. This kind of inflammation interferes with the body's ability to build and maintain muscle tissue, adding another obstacle on top of the hormonal and neurological changes already happening. And the fourth factor, the one most within your control, is lifestyle. Physical inactivity and inadequate nutrition, especially not eating enough protein. This is where the story gets interesting, because unlike hormones or motor neurons, this factor responds directly to what you do every day. Here's something that isn't talked about enough, and it might be the most useful thing in this entire video. Sarcopenia isn't just about looking different. It isn't just about sagging skin or thinner arms. Researchers describe a real physical change happening inside the muscle itself. As muscle tissue is lost, it gets replaced by fat and fibrous tissue. Some researchers have described the resulting texture as looking like marbled steak under imaging. This matters because it's not just a cosmetic change. It changes how your muscles function, how efficiently they can generate force, and how quickly you can respond when your body needs to catch itself, like recovering your balance on uneven ground. And that brings us to the consequence that researchers describe as the most serious: falls. According to researchers at Tufts University, including muscle aging specialist Roger Fielding, sarcopenia is one of the primary contributors to falls in older adults. And falls remain the leading cause of accidental death for people over the age of 65. Beyond the physical injury, falls can trigger a difficult cycle. Less confidence in movement leads to less activity, which leads to more muscle loss, which increases the risk of falling again. There's also a frailty pattern that researchers use to identify when muscle loss has become more serious. It includes signs like unintentional weight loss, a persistent feeling of exhaustion, and noticeable weakness. It also includes a slower walking pace and low overall physical activity. When 3 or more of these show up together, researchers consider it a signal that muscle and strength decline has moved beyond typical aging, and that it's worth bringing up with a doctor. I want to pause here and be honest with you about something most content on this topic won't tell you clearly. This isn't only a health issue, it's also a financial one that rarely gets discussed. One study estimated the healthcare cost associated with sarcopenia in the United States at $18.5 billion back in the year 2000. That number reflects how much this condition affects people's need for care, medical visits, and support, long before it becomes an emergency. There's another piece of this puzzle that almost never gets mentioned in mainstream health content, and it deserves a moment of your attention because it changes how some of you should be thinking about your own bodies. Researchers have identified a specific and more dangerous version of this condition called sarcopenic obesity. It happens when a person carries both excess body fat and reduced muscle mass at the same time, often with higher levels of fat stored deep around the organs, known as visceral fat. Research on this combination shows something striking. People with sarcopenic obesity face a notably higher 10-year mortality risk compared to people who have either low muscle mass alone or excess weight alone, without the other. In other words, this isn't simply two problems added together. When low muscle and excess fat occur together, the risk appears to compound. This matters because someone can look at the scale, see a number that seems stable or even reassuring, and still be losing dangerous amounts of muscle underneath. Weight alone doesn't tell the full story. Body composition, the actual ratio of muscle to fat, tells a very different one. This is one more reason why simple generic advice like just watch your weight misses so much of what's actually happening physiologically as we age. There's also a connection here to blood sugar regulation that research has increasingly focused on. Skeletal muscle plays a major role in regulating blood glucose and how sensitive your body is to insulin. As muscle mass declines, this regulation becomes less efficient, which can contribute to worsening insulin resistance. Researchers studying this connection have noted that the highest rates of new type 2 diabetes diagnoses tend to occur in adults over the age of 65, and sarcopenia may be part of why. This creates a two-way relationship. Declining muscle can worsen blood sugar control, and conditions like diabetes can, in turn, accelerate further muscle loss. It's a cycle. And like the fall risk cycle we mentioned earlier, the way to interrupt it involves the same core tools: appropriate movement and adequate nutrition, always guided by your own doctor. Let's talk about how researchers actually measure and track this condition over time, because the newest data gives us a clearer picture than we've ever had before. A large, long-running research effort called the Atherosclerosis Risk in Communities Study, or ARIC, followed nearly 6,000 adults with an average age in their mid-70s, tracking them from the year 2011 through the year 2023. Using grip strength and walking speed as measurements, researchers found that around 11% of participants already had sarcopenia at the start of the study. But what happened over time is the more important finding. The rate of new cases climbed steadily with age. Among people who entered the study in their 60s, new cases developed at a certain pace each year. By the time participants reached their 80s, that pace had risen dramatically, with new cases developing in roughly 5 out of every 100 people per year in most groups studied. This kind of long-term tracking matters because it confirms something we touched on earlier isn't just a one-time snapshot or an outdated estimate. It's a consistent pattern, observed again and again, across different research groups, different decades, and different populations. The acceleration after 60 isn't a rumor or an oversimplified talking point. It's one of the most consistently replicated findings in aging research. Now here's something encouraging buried inside all of this heavier information, and it's worth sitting with for a second. Notice that none of the studies we've covered describe this process as fixed or unchangeable. Every single one of them, without exception, discusses modifiable factors, meaning things that can be changed through action. That word, modifiable, is doing a lot of work in this research, and it's the reason we're not ending this video on a note of resignation. Let's get specific about what resistance-based movement can actually look like in real life, described in general terms, because different people will need different starting points depending on their own health and mobility, which again is a conversation to have with your own doctor or physical therapist. For some people, that might mean using a resistance band while seated. For others, it might mean body weight movements like standing up from a chair without using your hands, repeated a small number of times. For others still, under professional guidance, it might mean light dumbbells or machines at a gym or community center. The common thread across all of these isn't intensity, it's consistency. Muscles responding to repeated, appropriately dosed effort over time, not a single dramatic workout. There's also a bone health connection worth knowing about, because muscle and bone are closely linked systems in the body. The same hormonal and inflammatory changes that drive sarcopenia are also associated with osteoporosis, a decline in bone density and strength. Weight-bearing and resistance activities that help preserve muscle also tend to support bone health, which is part of why researchers so often discuss the two conditions together rather than separately. Weaker muscles combined with more fragile bones is part of what makes falls, which we discussed earlier, particularly consequential in later decades of life. If you were born in the 1940s, the 1950s, or the 1960s, you grew up in a very different scientific landscape around aging and nutrition than the one we understand today. For much of the 20th century, muscle loss in later life was treated almost as an unavoidable, unstudied fact of getting older, something doctors observed but rarely had specific tools to address. It wasn't until more recent decades, particularly research gathering pace through the 1990s, the 2000s, and into the 2010s, that scientists began mapping out, with real precision, exactly why this happens and what specifically helps. If the advice you received earlier in life feels different from what we're describing today, that's not because someone was wrong. It's because the research itself has matured, the same way our understanding of heart health, of smoking, and of many other areas of medicine has evolved with better tools and larger studies over time. This is part of why we make videos like this one. Not to alarm you and not to sell you anything, but to bring you what current, peer-reviewed research actually shows, translated into plain language, so you can bring informed questions to your own doctor rather than outdated assumptions from decades ago. Let's talk briefly about what doesn't hold up under scrutiny, because this space unfortunately attracts a lot of products and claims that go well beyond what the evidence supports. If you see something promising to reverse or cure age-related muscle loss entirely, that's a claim worth being skeptical of. The research we've walked through today talks about slowing, supporting, preserving, and in some measured, modest ways, improving muscle mass and strength. Real science tends to speak in careful, bounded language. Similarly, be cautious of extreme or unusual protein targets marketed to older adults, dramatically above the 1.0 to 1.5 grams per kilogram range. More isn't automatically better, and very high protein intake carries its own considerations, especially for anyone with kidney concerns. Which is yet another reason this is a conversation to have directly with your doctor, based on your own labs and your own health history. Not a one-size-fits-all number from the internet. But now we get to the part of this video that actually matters most. What the research says you can do. For years, a lot of well-meaning advice told older adults to eat less protein, sometimes out of an outdated concern about kidney health in people who had no kidney issues at all. Here is what the current research actually shows, and this is the detail almost nobody explains clearly. The standard general protein recommendation for adults is around 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. But a group of international researchers called the ProtAge Study Group, working with the European Society for Clinical Nutrition and Metabolism, or ESPEN, reviewed the evidence specifically for older adults and reached a different conclusion. Their recommendation: healthy older adults should aim for somewhere between 1.0 and 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day, and some more recent reviews suggest going as high as 1.5 grams per kilogram for those actively trying to preserve muscle and strength. That's meaningfully more than the general adult recommendation, not less. Why the difference? As we age, our muscles become less efficient at using the protein we eat, a phenomenon researchers call anabolic resistance. Because of this, older adults often need a higher protein intake just to get the same muscle-building signal that a smaller amount would trigger in a younger body. There's real research backing this up directly. A study published in Frontiers in Nutrition in the year 2025 followed a group of women between the ages of 60 and 75, all living with sarcopenia, for 12 weeks. Half consumed the standard 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram, and half consumed a moderately higher 1.2 grams per kilogram. The group with higher protein intake showed meaningfully better results, improved muscle strength, better body composition, and reduced fat accumulation compared to the standard intake group. This is exactly the kind of detail that tends to get lost in generic health advice. It's not just eat more protein as a vague suggestion. It's a specific studied difference with a real measurable outcome in people the same age as many of you watching this. But protein alone isn't the whole story, and this next part deserves your full attention. Nutrition supports muscle. Movement is what actually builds and preserves it. Research consistently shows that resistance exercise, meaning activities that involve your muscles working against some form of resistance, is the most effective type of exercise for maintaining muscle mass and strength as we age. This can include activities using resistance bands, light weights, or even your own body weight, like rising from a chair repeatedly or wall push-ups. Aerobic activity still matters too. It supports your heart, your lungs, and your circulation, and it plays its own role in overall health. But when it comes specifically to preserving muscle and strength, the research is fairly consistent that resistance-based movement has the strongest, most direct effect. One more detail worth knowing: after a bout of resistance exercise, older adults' muscles have been shown to respond to a somewhat higher dose of protein than younger adults' muscles do, in the range of 20 to 40 grams. This is part of why combining resistance movement with adequate protein intake shows up again and again in the research as the most effective combined approach, more effective than either one alone. Something worth knowing in case you ever bring this topic up with your doctor: sarcopenia actually has measurable diagnostic criteria. It isn't just a vague feeling of weakness. Researchers commonly use two simple physical measurements. The first is grip strength, tested with a device called a dynamometer, essentially measuring how hard you can squeeze with your hand. In large studies, researchers have used a threshold of about 35.5 kilograms for men and about 20 kilograms for women as a marker of reduced strength. The second measurement is walking speed, sometimes called gait speed, and a pace slower than about 0.8 meters per second, which is a fairly relaxed, unhurried walking pace, is used by researchers as another marker worth paying attention to. Neither of these numbers means anything on its own. They're tools researchers and doctors use together with a broader picture of your health. But knowing they exist can help you understand what a doctor might be looking at if this topic comes up in an appointment. It's also worth mentioning that the exact percentages researchers report can vary somewhat between studies. And that's not because the science is unreliable. It's because different research groups sometimes use slightly different definitions and cutoffs. A group called the European Working Group on Sarcopenia in Older People, often referred to as EWGSOP, has worked to standardize these definitions over time, but you may still see a range of numbers reported. That range doesn't mean the condition is made up. It means it's actively studied, refined, and debated by serious researchers, which, honestly, is how good science is supposed to work. Let's go back to lifestyle risk factors for a moment, because there are a couple we haven't covered yet that are worth knowing about. Research looking at community-dwelling older adults has found that chronic alcohol consumption and smoking are both associated with a greater risk of muscle mass and strength loss over time. Neither of these is a surprising villain in a conversation about long-term health, but it's worth naming directly here because these are genuinely modifiable factors. Alongside protein intake and physical activity, that research consistently connects to how much muscle someone retains later in life. On the nutrition side, vitamin D deserves a specific mention as well. Multiple research reviews on preventing and managing sarcopenia list adequate vitamin D status alongside adequate protein as part of a broader nutritional approach that supports muscle health in older adults. Vitamin D plays a role that goes beyond bone health alone. It's also connected to muscle function, and deficiency is common enough in older populations that it's frequently discussed alongside protein as part of a nutritional strategy. As always, whether you need vitamin D testing or supplementation, and at what amount, is something for your own doctor to determine based on your actual blood levels, not a general recommendation from any video, including this one. There's one more layer to this that researchers have been paying closer attention to recently, and it has to do with something a little less physical: social connection. Researchers studying sarcopenia have noted that its physical consequences, particularly falls and reduced mobility, can lead to social isolation, as people naturally become more hesitant to go out or travel once their confidence in their own physical stability has been shaken. Some research have even looked at family functioning and social environment as factors connected to sarcopenia risk, suggesting that this condition doesn't just live in the muscles, it ripples outward into how connected someone stays with the world around them. This is part of why addressing muscle strength isn't only about physical safety. It's connected to independence, to confidence, and to staying engaged with the people and activities that matter to you. Let's talk about chronic disease as a broader category for a moment, because several conditions common in later life are known to interact with and sometimes accelerate muscle loss. This is a general pattern noted across research, not a diagnosis for anyone specific. This is exactly why sarcopenia doesn't affect everyone at the same pace, even at the same age. Someone managing a chronic condition and someone who has stayed consistently active and well-nourished can be at very different points on this curve. Prolonged bed rest itself leads to a rapid and measurable form of muscle loss called disuse atrophy, which is part of why even short hospital stays are increasingly managed with an eye toward keeping patients moving as safely and as early as possible. All of this circles back to the same central idea. Age is one factor in this story, but it is far from the only one, and it's not the one you have the most control over. The factors that show up again and again across every single study we've referenced today: inactivity, inadequate protein, and in some cases smoking or heavy alcohol use, are the ones within your influence, starting today, with your doctor's guidance. None of this means you need to become a bodybuilder in your 60s or 70s. It means that small, consistent, appropriately guided resistance activity, combined with getting enough protein throughout the day, is what the evidence actually supports. Not extreme measures, not expensive supplements promising miracles, just consistent, well-supported basics. And this is exactly where I need to be honest with you about something important. Every body is different. Some of you may have kidney conditions, heart conditions, or take medications where increasing protein intake or starting a new type of exercise needs to be done carefully and specifically for your situation. This is not something to decide alone from a video. Please talk to your doctor before changing your diet or starting any new type of physical activity, especially if you're managing an existing health condition or taking medication. What works broadly in research doesn't automatically mean it's the right first step for your specific body, and your doctor is the person best positioned to help you apply this safely. So let's bring this together. Muscle loss after 30 is normal and often invisible. It accelerates in your 60s. By your 60s or 70s, you may have already lost more muscle than you'd expect, and that loss is connected to a specific set of causes: hormonal decline, motor neuron loss, chronic inflammation, and, most importantly, the modifiable factors of inactivity and inadequate protein. The consequences are real, including increased fall risk, but the response to it is also real, backed by specific, cited research. Adequate protein intake in the range researchers recommend for older adults, combined with resistance-based movement, done consistently and safely. If you take one thing from this video, let it be this: what you're feeling is not just getting old. It has a name, it has documented causes, and more importantly, It has documented research-backed responses. Ignoring it tends to feed the cycle. Less strength leads to less movement, which leads to less strength. But stepping into it, even in small guided steps with your doctor's input, can genuinely change the direction of that cycle. You are not powerless here. The research is clear that this process, while natural, responds to what you do. That's not a promise of a cure, and we won't pretend otherwise. But it is a real, evidence-based reason for hope, and that matters. If this video helped you understand your own body a little better, do 3 things for us. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next video, because we're going to keep bringing you real, sourced, honest information like this. Leave a comment telling me what part of this video stood out to you the most. And if you know someone, a parent, a sibling, a friend, who could use this information, share this video with them. It might be exactly what they need to hear today. And one final reminder before you go. This content is for educational purposes only and is not medical advice. Please consult your doctor before making any changes to your diet, your exercise routine, or your overall health plan, especially if you are managing a health condition or taking medication. Thank you for spending this time with us. Take care of that body. It's carried you this far, and with the right information it can keep carrying you a lot further.